Hello, welcome to Enterprise Code Rage 2022. This session is Make MySQL Your SQL. My name is Ian Barker and I'm an Embarcadero Delphi MVP. You can reach me on email at ian.barker@gmail.com or you can follow me on Twitter at @punctuation. And if you want to go to any of my websites and look me up there, it's about.me/Ian Barker. Hope you enjoy the presentation. Make MySQL your SQL. Well, first of all, what is MySQL? MySQL is an enterprise standard, free and open source client-server relational database management system. It's a big thing. It's used by a lot of people. It is massively popular and can be found powering some of the largest data warehouses in the world. There are versions of it used by all sorts of people. Back in the past, I think Facebook and Meta, as they're now called, used it. There are pick a company and they are probably using MySQL. Sooner or later, you'll come across it. It runs on almost every possible hardware and operating system. There are versions of it for Linux, which is very common, and Windows and Mac. It runs on everything you can imagine and every kind of hardware. There are even versions for Raspberry Pi and Pico servers like that. Most web hosting companies provide installations or servers that are either running MySQL already as part of the web server or are able to install them as part of the web server. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Best of all, you can easily connect to MySQL using RAD Studio with Delphi or C++ Builder. It's not difficult, and in fact later on in this presentation I'm going to show you at least 3 ways of connecting, and there are even more. It's one of the things that Delphi has always been very good at, and RAD Studio and C++ Builder has been good at, and that is connecting to databases, not just MySQL, SQL Server, which is Microsoft's kind of competitor, I suppose, or parallel product is probably the nicest way of putting it. But this is the strength of RAD Studio. This is what it can do. This is what Delphi can do and does it best, even from the very first version of Delphi 1. And you can even preview the data live at design time in the IDE. And we'll talk about that in a minute because a lot of people think you can't, but I'm going to show you how. Let's talk about some facts of MySQL. Well, MySQL has been around for 27 years. It's almost as long as Delphi, actually, funnily enough. It is the M in LAMP web stacks, if you've ever heard of that. So LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And this is the kind of default stack that people have for web servers and various other bits of equipment that are used to serve up web pages, both for blogs and internally, and also even for big websites. A lot of people use custom web servers as well. But that's a LAMP stack is your kind of bog standard web configuration, shall we say. It was originally created by, and I'm going to get his name wrong because he's Swedish, and I apologise, but it's Michael Widenius, or Widenius, at MySQL AB. I really should have looked that up, shouldn't I, before I did this presentation. It's called MySQL because Michael's eldest daughter is called My, or Me. So it's kind of MySQL. The company MySQL AB that was created by Michael Widenius was actually bought by Sun Microsystems, the big behemoth back in the day. And then later on, Oracle went along and bought them out as well. So it's now owned by Oracle, the present owners, and Oracle make a lot of money out of MySQL. Obviously, Oracle have their own Oracle database, which RAD Studio can also connect to and communicate with. But Oracle's a very expensive system, many, many thousands of dollars or pounds or euros, depending on what country you come from. MySQL is a variant of commercial or community server free, which we'll talk about in a second. But yes, Oracle own them, so there's a little bit of competition there, I would have thought, in the company. There are 2 main types of MySQL, and this confuses some people. There's a commercial paid version, And with this, you get some extra support and a few bells and whistles and, kind of really high-level enterprise stuff. And there's the community server version, which is free and open source and absolutely free. Now, I should emphasize that a lot of people think they can't use a community server for commercial purposes. This is not true. You can use it, and it is used for commercial organizations. The difference is that the commercial server has extra features that I personally have never needed to use. But if you're using very, very big data storage warehouses and things like that with MySQL, then you'll probably lean towards the commercial version. The commercial version comes with lots of support and things like that. The community server is pretty much as it says. It's supported by the community. Really not a problem, to be honest. There's so many experts out there that know how MySQL works. Community server, you'll never have a problem. If you've got a problem with MySQL community server, it's very, very easy to get some help. It's not a problem. Michael Vidinius went on to create another database called MariaDB, which actually we'll talk about in a moment. It's a fork of MySQL, so once he'd sold out to Sun Microsystems, he created MariaDB. It's largely compatible with MySQL. In fact, nearly all compatibility with it. It works quite well. And later on, we'll be using a MariaDB driver to connect to MySQL. And yes, MariaDB is named after his other younger daughter, hence the name MariaDB. So MySQL is named after his first daughter, me, and MariaDB is named after his younger daughter. And yes, he does have another child, Max. And yes, he named a database after him as well. There is a database available from Michael's company, and it's called MaxDB. It's a kind of different database, not quite as popular as well known, but it's not as popular, anywhere near as popular as MySQL. But if it had 5 kids, I guess we would have invented some more products and named them after his children as well. Great product, anyway. And how do you get MySQL? Well, if you're going to do any development, you need it on your own machine, or at least on a server or something like that you configure. And so you'll need to download it. The thing to do is to download the community version. And you can get that from the URL that's on the screen at the moment, dev.mysql.com/downloads/MySQL. And I'm going to show you how to do this in a moment. You can also download ready installed VMs or virtual machines from most providers. VMware have got loads and loads and loads of different LAMP stacks and things like that. It doesn't need to be anything special. MySQL works on a standard set of ports and you can get to it quite easily. But that's how to get hold of it. And just to show you how easy it is, I'm going to show you a quick video that will be me installing MySQL. And MySQL Workbench, which is a product that goes with it that allows you to do various configuration and writing queries and things like that. It's quite handy. Okay, so in order to install MySQL, as I said before, go to the MySQL site and click on the download page. There's a couple of options. This, where it says 32-bit, this just means the installer, not the actual server that you're going to install. And click on no thanks, just start my download. I mean, you can sign up if you want to, but it will still download the package for you. So, it's up to you. And it will take a little while to download the installer. And then it will run. Now, the installer is just the installer itself. And it's a little bit quirky. I don't think it's particularly intuitive. I've used it myself plenty of times. Click on Custom. And then click on Next. And you'll be offered all the possible servers. That's the weird part of it. Choose the x64 MySQL 8, which is the version I always use. And if you want the Workbench, which I suggest you do, go into there and select the Workbench as well. So to install something, you need to use that arrow. Yeah, familiar with this if you're a Delphi programmer, to make those two things installed. So those are the 2 bits that I want to have installed. And so I'm going to click on Next, go along and say execute, and all it's doing here is actually executing the actual process of downloading and getting the packages from the server. Again, as I said, it's a little bit quirky, but I kind of understand why they do it. There's many options in the installer. Gets a little bit tricky after a while. It's pretty quick. I've got a fiber connection, so I'm getting 1 GB down. But even on slower speed, it's not that. It doesn't take that long. It's Oracle. They're pretty good. These community servers, I think, might even be mirrored somewhere else. So click on Execute, and that actually does the installation process. It kicks it off. And as you can see there, doesn't take very long. I haven't speeded this up. This is all in real time. And after a second, it'll start installing the MySQL server as well. And that's it. It's complete. Now the next step is configuring the server. So click on that and say next, and it will ask you to configure some settings. You can choose what type of computer. If it's a main server, then choose server computer. But if it's your development machine, then keep the development settings. Now this is the most important part. Choose use legacy authentication method if you want to have backward compatibility. Nearly every system uses that option, the backward compatibility option at the moment, because a lot of the drivers haven't caught up. But you don't have to. Some of the packages we're going to look at can work with the other version. I've deliberately put an old weak password in there, so don't worry too much about that where it's warning me. This will not be a public server. Standard account. Yes, I want it to work across my server. And click on Execute. And what it's doing now is it's actually writing a MySQL configuration file. And then it starts the Windows service, because this is a Windows machine, or it would start the Linux daemon. And that's it. And then you click on Finish at the end of it. And you're all done. Not very difficult. Probably took, I think it took just over 3.5 minutes to install the whole package. Not very difficult. We do this a lot in our office. Anyway, that's it. And you're done. Okay, once you've finished installing all of that, you will find installed the MySQL server, which should be running, the MySQL command line client, and the MySQL workbench if you selected that as well, as I did in the video. So let's take a look at exactly what MySQL command line does. So the MySQL command line really is a command line. When you run it, you're basically running like a DOS shell or terminal shell. Type in your password, which is your MySQL root password. And then you can type in SQL commands, literally a prompt like that. So show databases, use MySQL as a database, show tables, and so on and so forth. It's a command line. Okay, so the MySQL command line, you can use that to your heart's content, but there are other ways of interacting with MySQL. And one of those is, in particular, the MySQL workbench. It's a tool that allows you to run queries and generally manage the MySQL server with a GUI. It's very useful. The main thing is it's a lot easier to use than the command line, and oh boy, is it a lot easier. You can work with multiple MySQL databases on multiple servers at the same time. It's not uncommon for me to have, 5 or 6 servers that I'm working on at the same time, and MySQL Workbench can easily cope with that. It's not a problem. The MySQL command line is quicker for some things, particularly if you're importing some very big SQL scripts and running them, because that's what you can do in the command line. It's usually quicker on the command line than it is to get the workbench to execute it, just because of the way it works. A lot of interaction for the workbench to show the GUI. And those of you that remember /dot, the command line command on MySQL to import a script is /dot. That's where the name comes from. So obviously they were big MySQL fans back in the day. The best tool, or the best adjunct tool, the best tool that is very comparable to the MySQL workbench is SQL. Now, we're all, as RAD Studio users and Delphi programmers in particular, we all should have a soft spot for SQL. I've written about it before on blog.embarcadero.com. It's free and open source, but even better, it's written in Delphi. Of course it is. Very, very good product. Very well written by Embarcadero, Becker, I think his name is. It's extremely powerful and very popular competitor to MySQL Workbench. You can go to HeidiSQL.com and get it. Just marvel at what it can do. It can connect to all versions of MySQL and MariaDB, of course, because they're compatible. But it can also do Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres SQL, SQLite. There's a 32-bit and 64-bit version of HeidiSQL, and there's also a portable version. You can, if you're kind of a traveling techie or traveling developer and you need to have a tool on there to connect to databases, you can put HeidiSQL on the thumb drive and it will run from the memory stick or thumb drive. It doesn't need an install, then it just runs from the folder. And of course, the thing that makes that possible is the way that Delphi is a self-contained executable when you write an application. So very, very useful. Great product. Can't say enough good things about it. Really, truly fantastic. The full Delphi source code, if you want to look at it and see how it does it, because it does do some slightly unusual things in the code, go to github.com/HeidiSQL/HeidiSQL. Now, connecting to MySQL with Delphi in C++ Builder, there's a couple of different ways of doing that. FireDAC is the built-in version. It comes included with Delphi and C++ Builder. Depending on what version you've got, there are different levels of database that you can connect to. Obviously, the professional version / community version can only connect to local DBs. But if you go for enterprise or architect, then you can connect to client-server databases and various cloud databases and middleware and stuff like that. They are very powerful Delphi DB components, native. They've got all sorts of capabilities that I'm not going to go into here. And I'll be doing them a disservice if I do compare them later to some other third-party components. But FireDAC is a massive subject all on its own. There are plenty of webinars about it, and we've got some more planned, I'm sure. The only slight downside, for me anyway, is that it does require a driver DLL to connect. There is no direct mode, so you can't just like put these components on and expect it to connect to a MySQL server on its own. It does need the driver. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If you want to read about FireDAC, then go to the link that I've got on the bottom of the screen there. Basically, just search the google.wiki and you'll find it in there. It's not difficult to find. One interesting thing about the RAD Studio documentation, and I have already mentioned this to a few people and we're going to fix it, the official documentation is wrong. The official documentation says that you cannot actually connect to a MySQL 8 live inside the IDE. They are wrong. I'm going to show you that you definitely can do that, and you can connect to a 64-bit MySQL server inside RAD Studio, which at the time of recording this is still 32-bit. And I'm not sure where this confusion came about. I'm not sure who wrote that documentation. There's a typo in there as well, which we're going to get corrected. But the fact that RAD Studio is 32-bit and the fact your app is 32-bit has got nothing to do with it. As long as you include the right driver, you need a 32-bit driver for the RAD Studio to connect to the server. As long as the driver is the right bitness for your app, so your 32-bit app or RAD Studio, then it will connect quite happily to MySQL 8, and it will do that even if it's a 64-bit MySQL server. So I don't quite know where that came about, but it's wrong, and I'm going to prove it in a moment. As you can see on the screen there, you can see that I've got an arrow pointing to the x64, which means it's a 64-bit MySQL D daemon, and there's the IDE, and I'm connected live, so don't know what went on there. Connecting to MySQL with Delphi and C++ Builder, let's talk about some third-party components, shall we? Well, if you're not using FireDAC, then the nearest thing to it in terms of how it works is from DevArt, and it's UniDAC and MyDAC. These are commercial in database connection components. In other words, you pay for them. They're not free. There is a trial version, and the trial version, I think it's like 30 days or something like that. And it's not crippled. It works, and then it stops working after 30 days. The way you use them is very similar to FireDAC. There's a lot of crossover between the two things. UniDAC in particular is a little bit more convoluted, but MyDAC is specifically designed to connect to MySQL. It's got a direct mode, which means that using the external driver DLL is optional. So you don't have to use it, which is a benefit, I'm sure. For people that are doing things like going to iOS and Android. Go to devart.com, they're quite a well-known product vendor, and go to /mydac and you'll get the MySQL components. Other ways to connect to MySQL with commercial components are the micro OLAP DAC for MySQL. I've used this very extensively myself. It is also a commercial paid database connection components. It's more similar to the T database, T table, and T query style of doing things. So UniDAC and MyDAC, the components from Devart, are more like FireDAC, which does things slightly differently. And Micro OLAP's DAC is much more like the old BDE style way of doing things with T database and T table and T query. Nothing to do with the BDE, it's just the way it works. Very, very compatible if you've got a BDE app. They even have a little component that if you click on a button, it finds every single BDE component on your screen, on your forms and your app, and will convert them to use the Micro OLAP components, which is extremely helpful. If you're still using the BDE, you really shouldn't be. All sorts of problems with things like Windows 10 and Windows 11. And I really do recommend that if you're using the BDE, stop and do something else now. There are plenty of alternatives out there. It's a fully direct mode. It doesn't actually have an external driver. You can't even get it to point to a DLL. It just doesn't care. It's not required, and that's a big plus for me. That means that I can write an application, just a single .exe or a single app or something like that, and it's all self-contained. It builds it in. It's purely written in Delphi, and when you compile it, everything that you need to connect to the database is included. It supports SSL and all the other things you'd expect. microolap.com/products/connectivity/MySQL DAC, but just Google them and you'll find it. Now, if you're going to go with FireDAC, there are a couple of ways of actually doing that. The FireDAC needs an external driver, and there are two drivers that you can use. You can either use libmariadb.dll or libmysql driver DLLs. I personally prefer the libmariadb ones. They just seem to work a bit better and not have so many problems. What used to be known as DLL hell back in the day when Visual Basic was around and all the rest of it. The way to do them, to get to them, is you go to the mariadb.com site, go to downloads and connectors, and as you can see there, select C connector, and then choose whichever version you need, usually the latest one, and then choose the operating system. If you are writing a 32-bit app or you want to have a live database preview in the IDE itself, in RAD Studio, then you need to pick the 32-bit version. If your app's a 64-bit, and some people only ship 64-bit, then you can download the 64-bit of the DLL, version of the DLL. If you do both, then download both, and it will install them in two different places. Pick up the appropriate DLLs and put them where you need them. All you need to do usually is to put them in the same folder as your executable and have them appropriately named. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment in the IDE, and it will work. The other option is to go to RAD SQL, and obviously because it's written in Delphi, and download the portable version of RAD SQL. If you're going to do it, you probably want to make it work in the IDE, you need to pick the 32-bit version, unzip it into a folder, and then pinch the DLL out of there, the libmariadb or the libmysql driver DLLs. They're installed in the folder there. Just download it and it's in the zip file. All the hard work's been done for you. So note that the driver DLLs are only required for FireDAC and to have RAD Studio or C++ Builder preview the data live. They must be the 32-bit versions for RAD Studio and C++ Builder, or it won't work and you will get an error. And it's a very cryptic error. It says something like bitness is wrong or something weird like that. I can't remember what the error message is, but a lot of people scratch their heads. I've had other MVPs contact me before and say, hey, I'm having this problem, how do you fix it? And I've shown them, and it's not always obvious. Even I had to have a long think about it, and I use this system a lot. The 32-bit driver DLLs, no matter what anybody says, can connect to 64-bit versions of MySQL and MariaDB server. And in fact, the default install for MySQL for some years now, I think a couple of years, 2 years at least, is a 64-bit version. And I have 32-bit apps that happily connect to these 64-bit versions, version 8. The documentation, as I said before on the website, is incorrect. Okay, let's connect to a MySQL server live in the RAD Studio IDE using FireDAC. So let's try connecting to the MySQL database using RAD Studio with Delphi. Here is my MySQL. It's running on my local machine. It's version 8. It's a little bit older, but it's MySQL community server. And what I've done is I have created a database called CodeRage 2022, and in there I've created a table called CodeRage 2022 _demo, and I've put some data in there. It isn't a lot. There's a description and an ID, and that's it really. Simple stuff, but it will serve to show you what to do. So if I take a quick look at what we've got a user called CodeRage 2022, standard authentication. There's different types of authentication for MySQL. In this case, we're just using the standard one. We can limit which hosts can connect. This is actually can sometimes be a problem in MySQL, but you don't want to have an open database across the internet and allow anybody just to connect. So you can limit this down to things like wildcards, or which client machines can connect to this host and access the database, and you can give them individual rights. I suggest you do a bit more reading about MySQL if you need to know more about that. I'll put a password in there as well. And there's our database in CodeRage 2022. So if we go to RAD Studio, we will select New Windows VCL application. And what we're going to do is go to the palette, and we are going to look for a MySQL link. Now, because this is FireDAC, we're looking for a physical MySQL DAC link. Okay. If we go to the properties, we're going to say what we're looking for, MySQL. The vendor lib, we're going to use libmariadb.dll, which I spoke about earlier on, I'm sure. And that should be all I need to do, I think. Yes, okay. And then we are going to need a T data source, because we're going to link a property to it. T data source. And what else do we want? We want an FD table, which is a FireDAC table. Okay. And we actually need a FD connection as well, which I nearly forgot. Probably the most important part. So FD connection. Okay. And I put those there like that, so we can see the way they link up. So the driver and the connection are linked together. The table goes with the connection, and the data source just makes the table available to the controls. And we are going to use a DB grid, because this is VCL. If it's FireMonkey, then you would have to do some data binding or some other technique to do it, because there isn't a data aware table in FireMonkey. Right, so let's just check what we've got so far. So the driver link links us to the actual driver that will allow us to connect to the database. This is FireDAC, and so it does need the driver. This is the DLL we talked about earlier on. The connection is the connection to the server. Now, in this case, we are going to connect it to our local server. So if I right click and select Connection Editor, Okay, and we can choose which driver ID. Well, we want MySQL. I should have done that earlier on actually. Driver ID, and that will then ask us for some details. So first of all, let's choose the server, which is localhost. The database we know is going to be called Code Rage 2022 score demo, because that's the one we created earlier on in the MySQL script there. And the username, which I've already set up, which is defined in here, is Code Rage 2022. So Code Rage 2022. The password I have set to Delphi ! And why not? And that should be all we need. And we'll just check that we can connect to that. And so we just click on OK here, and it says, oh, what did I do? Chose the wrong type of database. Is that what it was? Let's try again. There you go. So the database is actually called Code Rage 2022. So I'll just test that. Click on text. Okay, cool. Working. Right, so that's good. We know that connection is working. The table, we just want to make sure that it is pointing at that connection. And if we go down to here and click on here, it'll ask us to log in because it's going through that connection, and it will show us the available tables. So I'm going to choose the demo one. That's what I got wrong. I put the name of the table in there. And the data set is that. Okay, so now at this point, the only thing we need to do is just tell the control here, the grid control, where it's going to get its data from. So we will pick data source 1. And this is the next bit that the official documentation says doesn't work. So let's just see if I am wrong. So we'll go to table and we will say active, and there's your data in the grid. So official documentation is incorrect. It says you can't do this in RAD Studio, and there you go, I am doing it. So if we just leave that as it is, and we could do some code behind the scenes to make this active and inactive, save usernames, passwords, and things like that. So if I just run the app now, and up comes the app. Now, an interesting thing will happen. First of all, you can see the data in the grid, and this is all live. But if I go to here and click on here and say 2A, as soon as I go away from there, something very interesting happens. And that is, but without writing any code at all, and I promise you I haven't written any code whatsoever, if I just go and select this and say select all rows, you can see in here, live in the MySQL database, we've got description 2A. Now, for those of you that are used to RAD Studio with Delphi and how the data controls work, you're probably not at all surprised by that. You probably said, well, yeah, of course it's updated. But that is actually unusual. And when Delphi first came out, this was one of the really novel things that it did, and actually contributed towards Delphi being extremely popular with database app type vendors, really. It was its super strength, superpower, should I say. And it's definitely a two-way thing. If I was to update this field and say 3A, then it would be reflected in the controls. But there you go. That's how it works with RAD Studio, with the data being live. Right, well, that was how to connect using FireDAC. So let's try some of the third-party components and see the differences, because there are some very subtle differences, and it's worth looking and seeing what those are. So first up, let's try with Micro OLAP's DAC for MySQL components. So we saw how to access the database using FireDAC. Now let's try using the direct MySQL table controls from the third party. Okay, what I've got is, and I'm also going to show you how to connect to a remote server. The way I'm doing that is I have this virtual machine here. which is an evaluation thing. You can download these for free from Microsoft if you're a developer and use them for a while. And so what I have there is MySQL 8 running as a service on this server. This server is called WinDev2110eval, running on my machine, which is called Valhalla because I'm a bit of a Vikings freak. And this is Heidi SQL. I showed you earlier on the MySQL workbench, but this is Heidi SQL. It's basically the same thing, except this is written by Ansar Becker, I believe, and is open source, and as I said before, and it's completely written in Delphi. So I've got a database called CodeRage 2022, and then a table called CodeRage 2022_demo, exactly the same as I did before in the other demo. And here's the fields defined. As you can see, it's a lot easier in Heidi to work out how these things work, and even things like the username and the limitations and things like that are actually quite straightforward in Heidi. When I use these professionally, I work with MySQL every day in my regular job. I use a combination of both. I use Heidi SQL for some things, and I use MySQL Workbench for other things, and I use the command line for other things as well. It's just some things better done one way than the other. But my colleagues who do a lot of the support and technical management of things, they absolutely swear by Heidi. They love it. They think it's great. And so this is the data, as you can see, description 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., just the same as it was before. So what we're going to do, I'm going to create another VCL application. You can do this with FireMonkey as well, but this just happens to be easier if I demo it with a FireMonkey. So if we go to, say, MySQL, we're going to choose the DAC for MySQL, and I am using the latest version from MicroOLAP, which is their little thing there, 3.3.2. What else do I need? So I need a database, I need a table, MySQL table, because we're going to do exactly the same demo as we did before, and I'm just going to show you what the difference is. And then we need a T data source as well, a data source like that, because we always need data sources. Right, so again, exactly the same thing as before. You can go in here and select MySQL database editor, or you can type in the properties there, or do them in code. With my own products that I write based on MySQL, I actually, do it in code, obviously. The database name we're going to connect to is CodeRage 2022. The user ID is also CodeRage 2022. The password is I love Delphi 20. I see. I love Delphi ! You watch, I've got that wrong now. The machine name, which I have cleverly put into a notepad so I can remember it, is this one. Okay, we can leave compression on for now. We haven't got SSL turned on, but it does support SSL, and you need a key and a few other things as well, but that's probably a bit too advanced for what we're doing about here. So if we click on OK, that will work. And just to test that it will work, if I click on that, it doesn't work. You know what I did wrong. Typed in the password wrong. There you go. Type the password in wrong. Right, so now that we've got a connection, it automatically picks up the connection for the database. And if we click on here, the drop down will immediately show us the table. These controls are very, very fast, I have to say. It's pretty good. We already know the data source. And if you remember before, we got a DB grid. So let's do that once again, just to absolutely prove that we are doing this live, and that's why it's good to have some mistakes. Kind of like that. And in the properties of this, we will just select that data source. Now, if I do the same thing as I did last time and say active, what did we do on tape? Oh yes, data source. Ta-da! There it is. So if I just disconnect that, you can see that's obviously running. And the important thing to notice is that there is absolutely nothing extra to add. With FireDAC and AnyDAC, you do actually need the drivers. AnyDAC does actually support a direct mode as well, actually, but FireDAC doesn't. FireDAC actually needs libMariah db.dll or libMySQL.dll. But these direct components don't. You can literally create a single executable or a single app, and that's all you deploy. There isn't any extra files to deploy, which is very, very useful. And particularly if you're doing, like an iOS app where there are lots of restrictions on what you do and don't do with additional files. And it can get a bit tricky when you've got to include some DLLs and static binding and all that kind of nonsense. But we're not having to do that. Right. Well, let's look at another third-party library for connecting to MySQL. Again, exactly the same as before. You don't need to have the driver DLL. It's optional with the MyDAC components from DevArt. And let's just see what the differences are. Okay, so let's take a look at connecting to a MySQL database using DevArt's MyDAC. They also have a tool called UniDAC as well. So if we go down to the palette, there's one called MyDAC there. We need to put on a T connection. What else do we need? A table, and they have their own data source. Called TMI data source, and once again we will also have a DB grid just to show once again live data. So we'll put that one there like that and across. So if we look at the properties, the connection is already automatically set to the table. The data source, we're going to point at the table as well, and first thing we'll do is set up the connection to connect to the MySQL server. So my machine is called Valhalla because I watched too much of the Vikings programs when they were on, and the username is Code Rage 2022, and yes, I will change all of this once I finish recording this video. And the password is going to be I love Delphi. Exclamation mark, I think. And the database is Code Rage, like that. Okay, and let's just test. We're going to leave that saying direct. If we click it, tick that checkbox that says direct, it means it won't use the library. You remember we talked before about libMariah db.dll or the libMySQL.dll, which are the driver libraries. If we tick on direct, we don't need that. Code Rage, what do we call it? 2022. Yeah, let's check. Yeah, and so that green light there means everything's working. So we know that's definitely working. Click on OK. Right. Let's go into here and select a table. It asks to connect because it wants to connect to the table. That's the table we want. We've already got this table source selected here, and the data source, we'll just point it to that my data source one. And as soon as I say active in here, once again you can see the data being previewed live. Great stuff, very fast, very effective, the same as the MySQL DAC and FireDAC as well. Obviously FireDAC still needs a driver, but both MySQL DAC and the DevArt MyDAC, very similar names. There's a lot of DACs going around, it gets a bit confusing. Now DevArt also have a product called UniDAC, which connects to other things as well, but these third-party components do directly connect to the MySQL databases, which makes life a little bit easier. If I just go back to the palette, the other thing to notice as well is if I point to this, you can see here, hopefully, that it says Mac OS and Windows 32 64-bit, Android 64-bit, ARM, because I've got Mac OS ARM installed as well, and iOS 64-bit and iOS Simulator ARM. So really, and this is true of MySQL DAC as well, and FireDAC. All of these can work cross-platform. So you can write a Delphi program that will connect to MySQL. There's absolutely a plethora of choices rather than not enough choices. Great stuff. This is what Delphi really excels in. These components also work with C++ Builder. So if you've got RAD Studio and you're writing C++ programs, or you've got C++ Builder, these will also work as well. Although I'm primarily a Delphi MVP, I do some stuff with C++ as well. Great stuff. Absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be connecting to enterprise level databases using RAD Studio and Delphi or C++. I actually do it all day, every day as part of my day job. It's very successful. It's very nice to be able to produce an application that we can hand over to someone on a thumb drive and literally run a program that will connect to a very significant sized MySQL database that's running many gigabytes of data and just run from a thumb drive without any installation. That is possible with Delphi. There are no other languages that I'm aware of out there that can do that. With zero installation, you could literally connect to a corporate or enterprise database. It's one of the great strengths of Delphi is the robustness of it, the ease of writing programs with it, and this extremely powerful data connectivity. Which we'll focus on again coming up in future webinars and things like that. Anyway, I just wanted you to see what was going on. So we pretty much covered all the ways that you can connect to MySQL using RAD Studio, Delphi and C++ Builder. It's a very widely used database system, and Delphi is absolutely brilliant at writing apps that work with that. If you go down the route of using FireDAC and you use a library with it, the DLL, and you're looking at cross-platform apps, it can get a little bit tricky because there are some things to do with static libraries. It's all documented and you can read through that. That's not a problem. But it's just be aware that there's some extra steps. That's personally why I prefer to use the direct methods that are available in the two commercial products that I showed. But FireDAC has got its own strengths in some very, very comprehensive system and got lots of little extra bells and whistles. And hey, it's built into RAD Studio. So what can I say? In terms of cross-platform apps, you can have all three of these solutions, the FireDAC and the MyDAC and the AnyDAC, the three that are available. They've all got very similar names. It's starting to melt my brain a bit. But all three of those can do cross-platform to Android, iOS, Mac OS, Linux, I believe, as well, and Windows 32 and 64-bit. You know, with Delphi and RAD Studio, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be trying to target as many platforms as possible. C++ Builder can do a few, there's a few caveats to doing that, but generally speaking, it's the same as C++ Builder. But Delphi, this is its superpower, is handling big lots of data. And, you know, there are a lot of systems out there that shove data around the internet, and, behind the scenes is a Delphi program doing that. If you do use MySQL a lot, then you can get some very big databases. And when you take backups and you try to restore them on your own machine, that often is in the form of a SQL script, which is a text file. They can get very, very large. And I'm talking hundreds of megabytes for a text file, which is pretty humongous. I'm pleased to say Visual Studio Code immediately chokes and can't handle it. Notepad++, which is my go-to editor for some things, also starts grinding along as if it's swimming through treacle. But the one product that I do use that definitely can open these massive SQL text files if and when you ever have to work with them is UltraEdit. UltraEdit is an Idea company, the same as Idea being the parent company of Embarcadero. So I should give you a little bit of a caveat there and say, hey, there is a link between the two companies. But I wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't for the fact that it's actually very, very good at handling huge SQL files. And I'm talking, 150 megabyte SQL file, and you just open it in UltraEdit, and almost immediately you can just go navigating around, doing searches and replaces and deleting things, and it's just like you're working with a tiny little text file of a couple of K or something like that. Great product. Can't say enough good things about its handling of huge files and stuff like that. Anyway, I hope this has given you a bit of a taster for MySQL and, making MySQL your SQL, which was really what I was getting at. I think personally it's a lot better than, SQL Server. It's open, it's free, it's not really linked to anybody. I mean, I know Oracle own the company, but it is open source and there are a lot of people out there that are making it available. But give it a go and see what you think. There's an embedded version of MySQL. It's a bit complicated to set up, so most people don't use it, but in theory you could have an embedded server and have your app launch an embedded MySQL server and off you go. But anyway, that's been our presentation. Enjoy the rest of Code Rage. My name's Ian Barker, and as I said before, I'm an Embarcadero Delphi MVP. Get me at ian.barker@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at @punctuation, or go to about.me/Ian Barker, and you can list all the, you'll see all the websites there for getting hold of me and seeing what other things I write. And you'll see me around and about, I'm sure. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Oh, there you go. I hand over to myself. How weird. Jim's around somewhere. Here he is. I think he's here. Jim? Yeah,
I'm here. My camera's not working. Hold on.
Cool. You're an invisible man. It's a very good. It's a very good thing. We didn't really have any specific questions about the MySQL, which is a good thing. I think it's a fairly comprehensive video, so I covered most of it. There are different ways. I didn't show absolutely everything you could do with the MySQL stuff, because you can. A lot of the handling of the MySQL you do in code to connect to, to store the connection parameters and things like that. There are several nuances that to do with the connections that you get to learn as you go along. So I didn't want to go into the depth of it. I wanted to show people that you really can just use MySQL like that, and you can download it in just a few minutes. The video of me downloading and installing MySQL was done live. I did that because a lot of people go, "Oh, it's an enterprise product and it's difficult." No, it isn't. I did it in 3 minutes, so there's no reason. There's a great question here from Miroslav Rikic. I think one of the greatest typos I've ever seen for FireDAC, which says. Let me get the chat out of the way.
FireDAC.
Yeah. If we work with MySQL, is FireDAC better, faster than DB Express? If so, why? To be honest, I don't have any metrics on that. My guess would be yes, it'll be a lot quicker. DB Express is a technology in its own right, and FireDAC is not related to it. I did do some tests with some speeds to do with MicroOLAP's MyDAC, FireDAC, and any UniDAC's MyDAC. They've all got such similar names from DevArt, and some of them were faster in some things, some of them faster in others. Overall, it may be your use case will determine which is the quickest, but DB Express, yes, definitely is going to be quicker than DB Express for sure. There's no doubt about it. Why should I use Microsoft SQL Server Express instead of MySQL? Microsoft SQL Server Express is limited on the number of connections that you can have, simultaneous connections, and a few other things as well, database size, I think, and a few other things. MySQL is completely unrestricted. If you're using the community server, you're getting virtually the full product in every single way. We have, when I say we, in the day job that I do, I'm self-employed, but I work for some people. We have huge databases running on MySQL with very little problems and processing gigabytes of data, and in some cases terabytes of data. SQL Server Express would blow up very quickly. SQL Server is a different thing, but SQL Server is licensed in quite a heinous way, in my opinion, by Microsoft. If you get Microsoft SQL Server and you put it on a server, it starts to get very expensive because you're paying per server, you're paying for client access licenses, and you're paying per CPU core as well. And that can start to get extremely expensive. MySQL, you can just go and install it and off you go. The commercial version of MySQL does contain replication technology and stuff like that. So it does add some new dimensions to it that you would probably want. and some people just prefer the paid version anyway. So it's that's the differences. But yeah, if you ever need to insert into MySQL, use the array insert, says G. Nielsen. Yeah, that's more of a SQL thing. Do you insert records manually, or do you do it by array insert? Don't use table controls if you can help it. Use queries and prepare them and stuff like that. MySQL supports views and triggers and events and all the other things you can imagine. So I like it. I think it's a great database project, and there's a lot more fashionable stuff coming out shortly as well to do with document storage and things like that, and it's going to start getting a little bit complicated soon. And once people start adding AI in, because that's bound to happen, then it's all going to go horrible.
I wanted to comment here on a couple things. Actually, my session is pretty short, but we have plenty of time for Q&A.
Okay,
I did want to comment on one of these questions though. You're talking about like licensing and why to use Microsoft SQL Server versus MySQL. I've worked at a number of companies that use Microsoft SQL Server and have very good reasons for using Microsoft SQL Server. And yeah. So just there's a lot of options for databases, and the free options is a great place to start, but there are reasons you might upgrade. Now, Ian or myself would not be able to answer why you might make that choice. It's going to be something you're going to have to look at the difference between the different databases.
Well, years ago, I did actually work on a company that focused on just SQL Server, and the product was based around SQL Server, and there were very big public bodies, councils they're called in the UK. I suppose we'd call them regional authorities or something like that would be another term. And SQL Server ruled the roost there, because that Microsoft's got some very good licensing terms for that, but it still meant they were paying tens of thousands of pounds, as it was, in licenses. But they did it for a reason. And at the time, SQL Server supported triggers and events that Microsoft's MySQL did not support. And it was only until 5.2 or something like that that triggers and events came out, and that views were supported properly as well. And so that's when things started to converge a little bit between MySQL and SQL Server. But yeah, there's some people that it's a bit like the old IBM days. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, and it's true with nobody ever got fired for buying SQL Server. So especially if they're a consultant making a lot of money helping advise people on configuring SQL Server, I think that's if you're a gold partner for Microsoft, for example, or one of these kind of deals, then SQL Server is probably a lot cheaper for you. But also there might be technologies you're using in the background, and of course there are other big databases like Oracle and Teradata and things like that around. So it's horses for courses. But Microsoft SQL Server, great, but MySQL, very good as well. So, and it's everywhere.
And I spent a lot of my early years learning databases working with Oracle, actually. So I kind of have a soft spot for Oracle because I know my way around it really, really well. And there's things nice about that, and there are different features for each database that make it appealing. So
for sure. And if you take something like Postgres, which is actually very comparable in terms of the licensing, PostgreSQL compared to MySQL, very similar kind of licensing model and things like that. But Postgres is very, very different. You have a different way of accessing the data, and it has a private view and things like that. So again, it might be to a certain degree what you're used to and what tools you're using in the back end. Because if you're integrating with some ready-made package that's written in Django or PHP type stuff or something like that, then one technology might be better than another. I don't know.
Yeah, but certainly, and I was glad that you went into the different. I didn't know the naming of MariaDB and MySQL. That was an interesting little.
Well, I didn't know all his children got something named after. As I said, if he had 5 or 6 children, can you imagine the products that would have been released? Would have been great. But apparently, he's only got the 3, so he stopped at that. As MySQL and Mariah. Someone's saying, when will the replays be available? We may as well cross that.
So replays right now are on YouTube as one big long session, but we will take and chop them up. So if you want to go back and you're like, oh, let's see, at 3 hours in, I was watching this, you can do that and jump to the part you want to see. But we will have the it's a lot of replays to edit. There'll be a process of chopping them up and recombining and uploading it. It might take a week or two, but we'll
Yeah,
get that as soon as possible.
and on my sessions, I always do a blog post and put the replays in there as well. So all the slides you saw today are on blogs.embarcadero.com, and my session tomorrow, that post will go live tomorrow as well. And don't forget the competition as well.
That's right. Which I think we have a.
We've got a ticker for it. Let me find it. I can find it for you. Here it is. I found it. We can get it scrolling across the bottom. Okay.
And so that's a contest that you can, everybody that enters, if your session is approved, you get $100, and if you win, you could get $1,000 on top of that. So great opportunity to just share some of your experiences and your stories, case studies, etc., around enterprise development with Delphi and RAD Studio, C++ Builder, etc. So Alf adds, as I remember, private MySQL servers, you need commercial version.
Is obligatory. That's not correct. No, it's to do with what you do with the open source and how you distribute it.
Now, that being said, read the license agreements. Ian and myself are not representatives and not lawyers. So.
Yeah, nicely put. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's true of any licensing or any legal information like that. My understanding is you cannot distribute the community server. It has to be downloaded on the server that it's being used on. But I should point out that the people that I write for do actually have a commercial license for MySQL for in-house use and for use on the site. It wasn't massively expensive, but it was not cheap. You know, it's one of those things. But a lot of people use the community server. It's open source. You can rebuild it yourself. But what you can't do is then go and redistribute it and things like that. Cool. Right. Thanks, Al.
Well, if you do, the GPL kicks in. So
correct. Yes. Yeah. It's a rat's nest, isn't it?
So that's. I mean, it's not terrible to navigate, but you want to make sure you pay attention to it and do it right. And so it might be a good idea to talk to a lawyer. And we only say that because if I try and answer a question and then later you say, "Hey, Jim told me this," no.
Yeah, I've got this video with Jim saying this, and I got it wrong again. Yeah, I mean, take it with a pinch of salt, and things change as well. There could be a change in the license shortly. I mean, look at Twitter; that's changed immensely in the last couple of weeks, and changes every 2 hours. If you keep looking away, it's something different.